December 7, 1941. Pearl Harbor burns. The Arizona sinks beneath waves thick with oil and fire. Over 2,000 Americans die in a single morning. And yet, what if that wasn't enough? What if, despite the flames and the fury, the United States decided that Europe's war was not America's war? What if the sleeping giant never woke up? By late 1941, the world was already drowning in conflict. The German Reich controlled most of Europe. The Soviet Union bled in the snow. Britain stood alone, her cities burning under nightly bombardment. Japan carved through Asia like a blade through silk. And America watched. In our timeline, Pearl Harbor shattered isolationism in a single day. But what if it hadn't? What if political paralysis, public fear, or simply a different leadership had kept America neutral, not just in 1941, but for the entire war? This isn't a story about what America gained by staying out. It's about what the world lost. Welcome to a darker timeline. Welcome to a world where the arsenal of democracy never opened. To understand how this could happen, we need to rewind. September 1, 1939. German forces sweep into Poland. Britain and France declare war, but do nothing. It's called the phony war, a war in name only. Within weeks, Poland is erased from the map. Then comes the storm. Spring 1940. Denmark falls in hours. Norway in weeks. Belgium, the Netherlands, and France, the greatest army in Europe, collapse in just 6 weeks. By summer, the swastika flies over Paris. Britain fights on alone. Cities burn. Children evacuate. Churchill rallies his people with words alone, because words are all he has. Across the Atlantic, Americans watch newsreels with a mix of horror and relief. Horror at what's happening. Relief that an ocean separates them from the nightmare. President Franklin Roosevelt wants to help. He pushes Lend-Lease through Congress, sending ships, planes, and weapons to Britain. But it's a political tightrope. Isolationism runs deep in America. Millions remember World War I, the trenches, the gas, the million dead for nothing. Never again, they say. Let Europe solve Europe's problems. The America First Committee grows to over 800,000 members. Legendary aviator Charles Lindbergh speaks to packed stadiums, warning that war will destroy American democracy. Senators block military budgets. Mothers march in Washington, demanding their sons stay home. Roosevelt navigates carefully. He helps Britain, but he doesn't fight. Not yet. Then comes June 1941. Operation Barbarossa. 3 million German troops smash into the Soviet Union along an 1,800-mile front. It's the largest invasion in human history. Stalin's forces reel backward, losing millions. Cities burn. Prisoners die in the cold. But they don't break. And still, America watches. By autumn 1941, the world is split into 3 massive power blocks. Germany dominates Europe. Japan controls much of Asia and the Pacific. Britain and the Soviet Union cling to survival. Only one nation has the industrial might to tip the scales. Only one nation can decide the fate of the world. And in this timeline, it chooses to look away. December 7, 1941 still happens. Japanese carrier planes still strike Pearl Harbor. Ships still explode. Men still die. But here's where history turns. In our world, the attack unified America overnight. The next day, Congress declared war with only one dissenting vote. The sleeping giant awoke with thunder in its voice. But what if the isolationists had won? Imagine this: in the chaos after Pearl Harbor, isolationist senators block the war declaration. Not because they support Japan, but because they fear the consequences. Charles Lindbergh delivers an emergency radio address: "We cannot save the world by destroying ourselves." Roosevelt is furious. He imposes sanctions. He severs diplomatic ties. He sends the Pacific Fleet to defensive positions. But the votes aren't there. America and Japan enter a state of cold conflict. No declaration of war. Just tension, sanctions, and skirmishes. But what about Germany? On December 11th, in our timeline, Hitler made one of history's greatest blunders. He declared war on the United States, a decision that would doom his regime. But in this timeline, he doesn't need to. America isn't coming. He knows it. His intelligence reports show a divided Congress, mass protests, and a president with no public mandate for war. So Hitler holds back. He focuses everything on the Eastern Front and maintaining control of the Atlantic. Why provoke a sleeping giant when it's choosing to sleep? Japan, meanwhile, consolidates its empire. The Philippines, British Malaya, the Dutch East Indies, all fall without American resistance. Japanese forces even raid the West Coast, shelling Oregon and California, but they don't invade. They don't need to. By early 1942, the world has stabilized into a horrifying status quo. Germany controls Europe from the Atlantic to the gates of Moscow. Japan controls the Pacific from the Aleutians to Australia's doorstep. Britain holds on by a thread, rationing everything, bombing Germany by night, bleeding slowly. And the Soviet Union? Stalin's forces fight alone against the full weight of the German war machine. No second front. No American weapons flooding in. Just Russian blood and Russian winter. The question isn't if the Axis will win anymore. It's when. Spring 1942. The Eastern Front. Without American Lend-Lease, the math changes. In our timeline, the United States sent the Soviet Union 400,000 trucks, 12,000 tanks, 14,000 aircraft, and millions of tons of food and fuel. Stalin himself later admitted, without American production, we would have lost the war. In this timeline, none of that arrives. Soviet factories work around the clock, but they can't replace losses fast enough. German forces regroup and launch a new summer offensive, this time aimed at the Caucasus oil fields and Stalingrad simultaneously. The battle for Stalingrad still happens. It's still brutal beyond imagination. But this time, Soviet forces are thinner, hungrier, less mobile. By winter, the city falls. The psychological impact is catastrophic. Stalingrad was supposed to be the turning point. Instead, it becomes a symbol of defeat. By late 1942, German forces reach the oil fields of Baku. The Caucasus falls. The Soviet Union loses half its fuel supply in a single season. Stalin doesn't surrender, he can't. But Soviet defenses begin to crack. The front lines stabilize, hundreds of miles east of where they should be. Meanwhile, across the Atlantic, Britain stands alone. Truly alone. Winston Churchill broadcasts to his people, "We shall defend our island, whatever the cost may be." But what cost can a nation bear forever? By mid-1942, Britain is surviving, not fighting. The Royal Air Force still defends the skies, but without American reinforcements, bomber production slows. The Battle of the Atlantic grows desperate. German U-boats sink cargo ships faster than Britain can replace them. Food rations shrink. Coal runs low. Factories slow. Churchill pleads with Roosevelt. Secret letters. Backdoor diplomacy. "We need you," he writes. "Not your weapons. You." But Roosevelt's hands are tied. Congress won't budge. The American public, seeing no direct threat, remains divided. Newsreels show the war as a distant tragedy, terrible, yes, but not America's responsibility. And in the Pacific, Japan builds its empire unchecked. Without American carriers hunting them, Japanese forces consolidate control over Southeast Asia. They fortify islands. They extract resources. They impose brutal occupation regimes across hundreds of millions of people. Australia and New Zealand brace for invasion. They're next, and they know it. India, still under British rule, becomes a potential target. Japanese forces mass in Burma, eyeing the subcontinent. If India falls, the entire British Empire collapses. By the end of 1942, the world looks nothing like our timeline. Germany controls Europe and is pushing into the Middle East. Japan controls the Pacific and is eyeing India. Britain holds on, barely. The Soviet Union bleeds. And America? America debates. Congress argues. Protests continue. Some call for intervention. Others call for negotiation. But while America talks, the world burns. 1943, the year everything changes, for the worse. In our timeline, this was the year the tide turned. Allied forces landed in Italy. Soviet armies won at Kursk. American production reached overwhelming levels. The Axis began to crumble. Not here. By spring 1943, German forces have stabilized the Eastern Front. Soviet resistance continues, but it's a war of attrition now, and the Soviets are losing. Stalin, facing defeat, does the unthinkable. He opened secret negotiations with Germany. The Treaty of Kazan, signed in June 1943, is one of history's darkest compromises. The Soviet Union cedes Ukraine, the Baltics, Belarus, and the Caucasus to German control. In exchange, Germany halts its advance and recognizes Soviet authority over everything east of the Urals. It's not peace. It's a ceasefire built on exhaustion and terror. Stalin returns to Moscow, purges his generals, and begins rebuilding behind the Ural Mountains. He knows this isn't over. But he needs time. Germany, meanwhile, consolidates its empire. Occupation governments solidify. Resistance movements are crushed with brutal efficiency. The regime begins its horrific new order, a reorganization of Europe based on ideology and control. Millions suffer under occupation. We won't detail the atrocities here, they are well documented and unspeakable. Resistance fighters continue their struggle in the shadows, but without Allied support, their efforts become increasingly desperate and isolated. Across the Channel, Britain faces a critical decision. Churchill refuses to surrender. But by late 1943, his options are running out. The Royal Navy is stretched thin. Air defenses are crumbling. Food supplies are critically low. Then, in autumn 1943, Germany launches Operation Sea Lion, the invasion of Britain. In our timeline, Hitler cancelled this invasion because he couldn't gain air superiority. But in this timeline, Britain is weaker. The RAF is exhausted. And German forces have had 2 years to prepare. The invasion is brutal. British defenders fight with everything they have. Coastal towns become battlegrounds. The Royal Navy sinks hundreds of German transports, but more keep coming. By winter, German forces establish a beachhead in southern England. Churchill evacuates the government to Canada and broadcasts one final message to his people. We have not surrendered. We will never surrender. From across the sea, we will return. Britain will be free again. But Britain, for now, falls. The psychological impact on the world is immeasurable. Britain, the nation that stood alone, the last beacon of democracy in Europe, is occupied. Europe is now entirely under Axis control. And in the Pacific, Japan's empire reaches its peak. By 1944, Japanese forces invade northern Australia. Darwin falls. Japanese carriers patrol the Indian Ocean unchallenged. India, weakened by famine and political turmoil, becomes a target. The British Raj, already on the verge of collapse, disintegrates. India descends into chaos, caught between Japanese invasion from the east and internal revolution. In China, resistance continues, but without American supplies, Chinese forces are pushed back year after year. The war becomes a grinding stalemate that consumes millions of lives. And what about America? By 1944, the United States is an island of prosperity in a world at war. Factories hum. Cities grow. The economy booms as American companies supply both sides through neutral intermediaries. But there's a sickness beneath the surface. American society fractures. Some call for intervention, we can't let democracy die everywhere but here. Others double down on isolation, Europe chose its fate. President Roosevelt, exhausted and ill, dies in April 1944, 6 months earlier than in our timeline. Stress, they say. The weight of watching the world collapse while being unable to act. His successor faces an impossible situation. The Axis powers now control most of the globe. Negotiated peace, or eventual confrontation, seems inevitable. By 1950, the world has settled into a cold, terrifying peace. Three superpowers dominate. The German Reich controls Europe, North Africa, and the Middle East. The Japanese Empire controls Asia and the Pacific. And the Soviet Union, rebuilt behind the Urals, controls Siberia and Central Asia. Britain in exile operates from Canada, but it's a government without a country. Resistance movements flicker across occupied Europe and Asia, but they're isolated and undersupplied. And America? America remains neutral, but deeply paranoid. The United States military expands massively, not to invade, but to defend. Coastal fortifications line both oceans. The nuclear program accelerates in secret. America develops the atomic bomb by 1945, but never uses it. Instead, it becomes a deterrent. A warning. Come near us, and we end the world. But isolation comes at a cost. American culture shifts. Democracy survives at home, but it's hollowed out. Paranoia and fear replace optimism. The American dream becomes insular, focused on protecting what's ours, not spreading freedom. Trade happens through carefully managed channels. American corporations profit from the New World Order, but they do so quietly, shamefully. And in the occupied territories? Life goes on, but under oppression. Generations grow up never knowing freedom. Resistance becomes cultural rather than military, books hidden, languages preserved in secret, small acts of defiance that keep hope alive. Technology advances, but differently. Without the pressure of Allied cooperation, scientific progress is fragmented. Jet engines develop slower. Computers take longer to emerge. The space race doesn't happen because there's no competition. By 1960, the world is colder, darker, more divided. The German Reich faces internal fractures. Occupied nations never truly accept their fate. Economic strain grows. Leadership struggles emerge as the original regime ages without the unifying force of war. Japan's empire faces similar issues. Occupied populations resist. Resources become harder to extract. The dream of a unified Asia under Japanese rule proves impossible to maintain. The Soviet Union rebuilds, slowly, methodically. Stalin dies in 1953, and his successors begin quiet rearmament. They haven't forgotten. They are planning. Waiting. And America watches from across the oceans, powerful but paralyzed, rich but guilty. By the 1970s, cracks appear everywhere. Resistance movements grow bolder. Economic systems strain under the weight of occupation. The Axis powers, having won the war, begin to lose the peace. The world inches toward another conflict, this time potentially nuclear. But that is a story for another timeline. What if America stayed neutral in World War II? The answer is sobering. Without American intervention, the Axis powers would have dominated the globe for decades, not forever, but long enough to inflict immeasurable suffering. Britain would have fallen. The Soviet Union would have been crippled. Europe would have remained under occupation for a generation or more. Asia would have endured brutal imperial rule. Millions who survived in our timeline would have perished in this one. And America? America would have survived, yes. But it would have lived in a world where democracy became a relic, where freedom was a memory, where the cost of staying safe was watching the world burn. In our world, American soldiers landed on the beaches of Normandy. They fought through France, across Germany, and into the Pacific. They didn't do it alone. The Soviets, British, and countless resistance fighters deserve equal recognition. But American industrial might, American soldiers, and American willpower helped tip the balance from darkness toward light. This alternate timeline reminds us that history is fragile. The choices nations make ripple across generations. The decision to act, or not to act, can determine whether freedom survives or dies. Today, we live in a world shaped by those who chose to fight. Not perfectly. Not without cost. But they chose engagement over isolation. They chose to believe that defending freedom abroad ultimately protects it at home. In 1941, America woke up. And the world changed because of it. History is full of moments that almost changed everything. The question is, what if this one had? Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this exploration of alternate history, hit that subscribe button and let us know in the comments, what ifs should we explore? Until next time, remember, the world we live in was never inevitable. It was chosen.